Ray presents Lord Rhyolith. Lord Rhyolith is one of the most ancient elementals in existence. In other words, he's the grandpa of big rock guys.
Get off my lawn!
Born from the fires that forged Azeroth itself, he is responsible for the creation of new elementals in the Firelands.
Where is my walker with tennis balls on the end of it?
And still possesses a searing hatred of the Titans
Nuisances!
for what he considers their monumental arrogance in relocating him.
Always coming around here trying to sell me your magazine subscriptions and your Girl Scout cookies. Nuisances! Nuisances!
I actually have to say that before pulling every single time now. They think that it's going to bring us good luck, and all it's brought us really is a bunch of pain.
A horrible death.
A horrible death.
One of these times it'll work, though. One of these times it'll work.
So this guy is basically the Mr. Wilson to our Dennis the Menace. If you read that cartoon anymore, I don't know. Solar Flare, why don't you give us the lowdown on what we can expect for health pools and stuff?
Look at some health pools. So in 10 man, Rhyolith has 15 million health, and in 25 man, he's got 46 million health. And he will occasionally spawn 2 types of ads, and their health pools are as follows. Fragments of Rhyolith have a 116,000 health in 10 man and a 465,000 health pool in 25 man. Sparks of Rhyolith have 1.7 mil in 10 and 5.6 in 25.
Yep. And Coltrane, why don't you go over kind of what people can expect as they go through this fight? I mean, how does it all work?
You can expect a lot of death. a lot of random, glorious death.
This is the RNG boss, everybody.
This
Truly
is
random.
And yes, and I actually got an email asking what RNG meant. It stands for Random Number Generator, and it basically means that anything can happen at any time. So things like the RNG can be going in your favor, and it could not be going in your favor. So it's funny. I was actually talking to somebody who is in a more hardcore progression, and they are 6 of 7. They're working their way through, and they say they one-shot all the bosses. They're working on rags right now, except Rhyolith.
Really?
Yeah, it usually will take sometimes 5 and 6 tries still, because this guy is that much of a pain.
He is.
Basically, the way the fight's going to work is you'll approach him. He'll be sitting on his little mound, his little island.
Yep.
And he's this huge guy. And the encounter is basically a 2-phase fight. When the fight starts, he's just going to start walking. He's going to start doing his thing. And this is actually like a single tank fight, but at the beginning, he cannot be tanked. He's just going to kind of do his thing. And depending how your DPS is doing, the raid itself will actually steer him. So he will always be moving in a forward motion, but depending on what legs you DPS and that kind of thing, will actually turn him either left or right. At the beginning of the fight, too, he's at 100% health, and he has a huge armor buff.
Yep.
Throughout the fight, he'll be spawning volcanoes, and he will be lighting those volcanoes on fire.
Yep.
In addition to that, he's also going to have these ads, the sparks and the fragments that Solar Flare mentioned. In addition to that, these volcanoes, when he walks over them, will actually spew lava fire of hot death on everyone that you need to watch out for.
Yep.
But I will say that there is so much going on your screen at one time during this fight. It's just insane how much is going on.
It is insane. And, hopefully I have a couple of tips for people that are trying this for the first time, or if they're having issues with certain things, just to make it a little bit easier for your raid team. And we'll get into that in a little bit. Let's talk about how we damage him, because it is kind of unique in the way that they do this. Aethric, you want to talk about this a little bit as far as what how the damage thing works out for Rhyolith?
Yeah, sure. Well, during phase 1, his left and right foot both have their own unit frames and can be attacked separately.
Yep.
And the protection by his obsidian armor also applies to the feet.
Well, the damage done to each foot is going to be divided equally between both feet, as it turns out. So every few seconds, there's going to be an adjustment period between the feet. And for example, if one is at 48% health and the other one's at 50, they will combine and then switch to 49% health for everything. And the feet are always going to be half the health of Rhyolith as far as numbers, as far as his body is concerned. So it's kind of a unique mechanic for how damage is done.
Right.
So there.
Well done.
Yeah. Coltrane, you were talking about moving Rhyolith, and I know that you've steered a couple of times, correct?
Yes, and run us right off the cliff.
Awesome.
On several occasions. I have then had my driver's license revoked, my Rhyolith license revoked, and it's been given to our hunter, who has done a fantastic job, a fellow by the name of Wyatt Ork. He's done a brilliant job. But to get to how to move him, basically, when the fight starts, you're going to notice a little UI thing at the bottom of your screen. It's going to kind of display, let's call it a direction gauge. Basically, it's a horizontal energy bar that will move left or move right, depending on how much damage you're doing to each foot. So,
right.
At the beginning of the fight, if you were to damage just his right foot, the gauge will increase exponentially on the right side.
Yes.
And the way that whoever's driving, this will help as far as to know his turn radius and how tight of a turn he's making. If that gauge, meaning all DPS is on that right foot, that gauge is going to go to full.
Right.
That means that Rhyolith himself is going to make a really sharp turn. But if it's only at about half, he's going to make kind of a slow turn. And if it's directly in the middle, meaning it's not going left or right, he's just going to continue to go straight. So the idea here is that you're going to damage each foot, how the guys were saying, and that will steer him left or right. And the idea here is that you want to move him onto these active volcanoes that he is spawning and activating throughout the fight.
Right, and if you stop DPS on both feet, he will correct himself, so then he will straighten out at some point. Right. It's just it looks at overall damage between both feet and adjusts appropriately for that damage difference, I guess. Let's go through some of these abilities that Rhyolith has in Phase 1. Solar, you want to talk about some of this stuff?
Right on. So he's got obsidian armor, which protects his legs. So it has 80 stacks, and 80% equals 80% damage reduction. So it goes by 1%.
Yep.
So for every volcano that he steps on, he loses 10 stacks of that buff. So you're now going to be driving him with 10% more DPS. Well, it's actually 70% less, but anyway.
Right. And it's just the active volcanoes. When he steps on those, it's just the active ones that will reduce his armor. So, okay.
Mm-hmm. And then he does something called Concussive Stomp, which is unavoidable fire damage and knocks back players 20 yards. Mm-hmm. Within 20 yards, excuse me, and creates 2 or 3 volcanoes. So that's when you want to drive them into those volcanoes because they're up. So.
Mm-hmm. Am I, by the way, while we're talking about this stomp thing, am I the only idiot that still jumps halfway through the cast trying to avoid the damage and the knockback?
Well, considering I play a druid healer, yeah.
Every time I see him casting that, I'll jump and try to avoid it, and it never works.
That's a good raider, though. That's awareness. You're trying to do your part. That's good.
So every 20 or 25 seconds, he casts, say, fragments or sparks. So you get 5 fragments or 1 spark.
Yep.
And you handle those appropriately. Should I go over each one?
Let's do that. Let's talk about a little bit about these fragments and sparks and kind of what they do. The fragments, when they come out, there's going to be 5 of them, and they're easily tankable. There's not a lot of damage going out, but they have something quirky going on with them. Aetheric, you want to talk about that a little bit?
The fragments have low health, and after 30 seconds after they spawn, they'll perform Meltdown if they're still alive, dealing 100% of their remaining health as damage to a random player before disappearing.
Right. So you really want to make sure that you get those guys down.
They have to go down quick.
Yeah, before that 30 seconds is up for sure.
How does that work for you guys if they have such little health? I mean, does it go pretty quick? I mean, is it a lot of AO? I mean, is it not even big at all or what? Or is it a problem?
They go down pretty quick for us.
Yeah,
I mean, we have
I would figure.
We have one of our tanks gather them up, and then we've got a warlock who runs in and does his little hellfire and a shadow priest AoEing off of him. So they go down, in a couple seconds.
Right.
Once in a while, you'll get like 2 sets of fragments. Sometimes we've had another set of fragments will spawn, like we've been dealing with the spark. But you just got to make sure that you DPS those initial ones down before you move on to the second set of fragments.
Right. And
otherwise, in hunters, you can misdirect those fragments to your tank hunters. So they appreciate that.
Absolutely, especially if you have a tank that maybe doesn't have the best AoE threat stuff. I mean, hunters, please misdirect. Coltrane, you want to talk about these sparks?
The wonderful, wonderful sparks.
Yeah.
Well, the spark is essentially a big guy, and he's going to, for some reason, he's going to spawn on top of a player, which usually happens right in the middle of the raid.
Right.
And what happens is he's this big spark. He actually has a pretty good high health pool. I believe it's 1.7 in 10-man and 5.6 in 25.
Yep.
And he's going to have a pulsing fire thing that he's going to be shooting out for him. That's going to hit the raid for 15k damage in 10-man and 35 to 40k in 25. So basically, when he spawns, usually right in front, in the middle of the raid, that off tank needs to grab him immediately and drag him to the edge. Just get him out of the raid as soon as possible, because there's so much damage going out. And with this pulsing fire, it just gets to be overwhelming for your healers.
Yeah, basically, it's like a warlock's hellfire. It's kind of like that. So you want to make sure to get him away from everybody.
Right. And he also has a kind of a armor buff similar to Rhyolith that's on him when he first spawns. He actually, every 5 seconds, he gains a stack of Infernal Rage, which increases their damage done and their damage taken by 10%. So, well, I guess in a way, so no, it's not an armor buff, but as he gets these stacks of this buff, he will do more damage, but then he will take more damage. Right. So what you'll notice is when you first start DPSing him, your numbers are going to be, they'll just increase exponentially as his stacks go up. So some raid teams advise, don't start DPSing the Spark until he's at about 4. Personally, for me, I like to start DPSing him right away, because when he hits 4, and if you start then you've got to, because he gains this thing quick. He's going to be doing a lot of damage to that tank, even with this stacking, debuff to him, so to speak, that it could wipe your tank. So I start DPSing him right away after the tank has aggro, and start getting him down, because once that thing gets to 8, 9, 10 stacks, he's doing an insane amount of damage on that off tank. So,
And Aetheric, why don't we have you talk about the next ability that Rhyolith has, shall we?
The next ability, I don't recommend letting him cast it.
No.
But if you're looking for a creative way to die, this is it. If somehow Rhyolith gets steered the wrong direction or what have you, and gets to the lava ring around the little island where you're fighting him, he will drink the magma and deal 35,000 fire damage to all raid members every second for 4 seconds.
Yep.
So that's 150k damage that you do not want to take.
Right. That you and I've tried to tranquility, during that time and save people, and it doesn't work.
No.
And this
not
is
worth it.
And this is
when Coltrane's driving, right? Just right off the cliff. Is that what we're saying? Okay.
Yes.
Guaranteed.
Yes.
His thirst was quenched
So
every time I was driving. He was very refreshed.
Oh, I bet. And this is one of the top 5 ways to die on Rhyolith. This is probably the best way to die on Rhyolith. When he gets to the edge, he drinks the magma and he kills you. Now let's talk about the second way to die on Rhyolith, shall we? Okay, so Rhyolith creates these 2 or 3 volcanoes every time he does concussive stomp. And when he stomps on any volcano, he creates a crater. Right? So he will create this crater, and then after, 20 seconds or so, up will pop this little thing, this little cone that looks fairly harmless, until these lava lines come out of it. This magma comes out, and in this radiating pattern from the center of this crater, and it's 4, 5, or 6 of these lines that kind of go through the raid, go all over this island, and it's a good way to die.
Oh yes,
it's a sure way to die because I think it takes off. What is it, like 50,000 damage, 75,000 damage on the magma flow. And
it's possible to live through, but it's like a lot of stress on your healers.
It basically drops you down to about nothing. And then what happens if you stay on the line, or if you happen to be on the line of lava or magma before this, it will explode. And if it explodes, you're dead.
Good night.
You're dead. It's 150,000 fire damage. So you will not live through that if you are anybody but a tank. And even tanks won't like that very much. So, and the other thing about these volcanoes is when they are active, they will do these stacks of, what is it called? It's called eruption, right? So these stacks of eruption will go on different raid members, 3 players in 10 man, 6 and 25, and they'll stack up. They do, each stack I think is 12,000 fire damage and blah blah blah, but it stacks a debuff on you, so it increases your fire damage taken by 5% for it's like 14-15 seconds, and stacking to a maximum of 20 times. So you can take 100% more fire damage for each stack. I mean, for each time that you get eruption placed on you. So yes, it hurts a lot. If you get a lot of these stacks of
crazy
of
damage
eruption, it's just you can't keep up with it at all. So, what's the way that you guys would combat this? How about you, Coltrane? You got an opinion on how we're going to combat all this damage?
Well, it's a lot of damage that's going out.
Yep.
It's the basic thing, a big thing that was really hurting the raid is this magma flow. Yep. That causes a lot of damage. And when these lines come out, they don't come out in a straight line. They're a little jagged, so they're a little random. One thing that some of us tried to do is actually, in a weird way, kind of run towards the volcanoes, because they will kind of come out to the sides kind of diagonally. That kind of seems to help to be closer to the point of origin in a weird way. But basically magma flow was a big thing that was causing a lot of the damage. If you have deadly boss mods, you will see a big thing that will say magma flow.
Right.
We encourage you guys to yell out lines or magma flow or something.
Or watch your feet.
Right, exactly, because there is so much going on in this fight, and everyone is paying attention to so many different things. DPS is focusing on the ads, the driver's trying to steer Rhyolith, the tank is trying to pick up the spark, and also the fragments, or another tank would be. And so it really helps to suddenly remind everyone, hey, watch your feet, or magma flow, or something like that, because there's so much going on at once that a quick glance down, oh, geez, here it comes. You know what I mean? Really, really helps out with the damage.
Right, right. And also, the other thing is making sure that you steer Rhyolith over the active volcanoes pretty much as soon as they happen, because the other thing that we talked about were these stacks of eruption, right? So these stacks of eruption are because of the live volcanoes. So you want to make sure to steer him over live volcanoes and not let them be active for very long. So it's kind of like you want to make sure that you're not hitting this magma flow at the same time that you want to make sure that Rhyolith is steered over these live volcanoes so that you can create more magma flows.
Right. and that makes the active ones priority 1.
Yeah.
Like the second an active one spawns, you need to start steering him towards it. I mean, unless you're like, 1 or 2 steps from hitting an inactive one, this needs to be ASAP, because these stacks of eruption get so big and so fast, and the damage just gets so huge after so long. So
yeah.
Anyway, just steer them towards those active ones as soon as you possibly can.
They really do, and that is actually ways to die on Rhyolith number 2 and number 3. By the way, those volcanoes, the eruption stacks, and then getting hit by the magma. So let's move on to way to die number 4. Which is the ads. So I think we kind of discussed this a little bit. The little ads, the fragments, you want to make sure to AoE down right away, because at the end of that 30 seconds, the damage that they haven't taken yet will be reflected onto the group, right? And then the big spark guy, he shoots out the hellfire type of stuff, and you want to make sure to stay away from him, and he'll spawn on somebody, most likely that is really low on health.
Right.
So have your B-reses ready.
And also, too, one thing that DPS, it's also your responsibility to get away from the spark. When this thing spawns in the middle of the raid, don't just stand there just taking damage from this spark and waiting for the tank to come and grab it and move it away.
No way.
You know what I mean?
No
right.
way.
Just like, come on, tank, pick this thing up. Like, it's also your responsibility to kind of get out of the way to kind of help out.
Yeah, it's craziness, absolute craziness. And as far as, okay, let's just talk a little bit about who's doing what here, a little bit more on how we steer them, how many folks are doing this, who's doing what, and there are a couple of different ways to do this as far as how many tanks you need. And Coltrane, are you guys using one tank or two tanks?
We are actually using 1.5 tanks, if that makes any sense.
Okay.
No, we are using one tank we're using on the Spark. Mm-hmm. And then we are using actually a second tank to help pick up the fragments. So we are doing a 2-tank deal. The only reason I say it is that he's a bear tank. So occasionally he'll switch to Kitty. Right. So he can do some DPS as well. So in a way to say it, we are using 2 tanks as well. But you really only need the 1 tank to pick up the sparks. The fragments actually don't do that much damage melee-wise. They'll do a ton of damage when they explode. So we have 1 tank dragging the spark to the edge. The other tank is just picking up the fragments in the middle, and everyone's just AoEing them down.
Gotcha. And that's kind of what we're doing as far as the setup is. That we have 2 tanks as well, 1 to pick up the spark and move it out of the group, 1 to pick up fragments and bring them all together. We have the ranged people are on ad duty, and we have our melee folk on the legs. So we have been steering with 2, and I think that might be 1 not enough.
That's one thing that we changed, actually.
Yeah. I heard a lot of people do 3 steering now more than they do 2, just generally speaking.
Yeah, and we found it to be immensely helpful. Basically, when we're saying 3, we're putting 2 people on the right leg and 1 person on the left. If you do 2 people, what's going to happen is, depending on which way he needs to turn, one of your DPS is going to have to throttle his DPS, or actually stop DPSing, or to help out on the right one. They're going to find themselves having to throttle, not being able to go all out. Right. If you have 2 people on the right and 1 on the left, that 1 guy on the left can just go full bore, like the entire fight. He can just go nuts because he's having to compete with those 2 people who are doing DPS on the right. So, and what's also great is if suddenly he needs to make a really sharp turn, that 1 DPS on the left can instantly just switch to the right, and now you've got 3 full DPS on that right foot, and he'll just turn super, super quick. Right. So when we split it up and have 1 on left, 2 on right, this way you're doing more and more DPS to the boss, which is another issue that can occur and can lead to wipes, is actually not DPS his health fast enough while you're trying to get the stacks off.
Yep, and that causes problems down the road because, number one, it takes a lot longer doing damage that way. The other thing is Rhyolith gets these stacks of molten armor every time he walks over an active volcano. And so that comes up later when we talk about Phase 2, about another way you can die. We'll get to that in a second. But it's just all of the things going on. I think having 3 DPS on the legs is probably going to be the way to do it. So I hope my raid team is listening, because this is what we're going to try. We're going to do this tomorrow.
Take notes.
That's right. And that kind of brings us to, so you've got the DPS on the ads, you've got DPS on the feet, you've got tanks doing the ads. There's also a 1 tank method, but I think you need to have a tank that has some serious cooldowns, like a paladin, or somebody that really knows their class well, that can get out of stuff quickly. Some healing, so maybe a DK. I see Boom Airs in the chat room as well.
Yes.
Let's talk about that though. Do we want to use 2 tanks for this fight? I mean, I was always hearing 1, but
well, I think the goal is to probably use 1, but I don't necessarily think that everybody's there yet.
But I mean, that's primarily just for when you put him into phase 2, and if we can just crunch, raid cooldowns, and he could crunch his, just rotate his cooldowns, wouldn't that, in theory, work just fine?
Right. I mean, well,
an extra DPS.
Right. It would be an extra DPS. The problem is that when you have all of these ads, they come out. I think they come out faster and faster as time goes on, or at least they seem to. And with that, it just becomes kind of overwhelming, and the tanks take a ton of damage because if they get those stacks because of all the damage going out with eruption, with the increased stacks of fire damage on each player, it becomes kind of a race to get to phase 2 so that nobody dies. I mean, it's just one of those things. You got to work it out. You got to try it and figure it out for yourself.
Absolutely.
Good to know.
Yeah.
I would mention one thing. When we were talking about having 3 DPS on the legs, and the main priority being you need to DPS his health down as well. One thing that was wiping us is that we were able to get down his stacks of armor. Mm-hmm. But he will actually not enter phase 2 until he's at about, 25% health?
Yes, 25.
So he could have his armor off, but he's still walking around, stomping around.
Right.
Can still easily wipe the raid. So what we found as far as to have some idea if your DPS is okay or if there's enough on the legs is that at about 30 stacks of his armor, meaning it's gone down to 30, he should be at about 50% health around there. So if he's about there, then you're about right in the wheelhouse of where he needs to be as far as DPS is concerned. So by the time you get his armor stacks off, he should be pretty close to entering phase 2. We've actually sometimes, once his armor stacks have fallen off, if he's close, if he's at like 30% health and we only need another 5, we will actually stop DPSing the ads, except for the fragments. You just got to make sure those blow up before the 30. And just focus straight on his legs, like one or the other, just to push his health down to 25%, just to force phase 2.
Right. And if you do it that way, he will be basically spinning in a circle. He'll be doing his little pirouette as well. So, and that means that he's not crushing any more volcanoes. So the stacks of molten armor that he gets when he steps on a live one will fall off. That's the hope as well, because the 5th way to die to Rhyolith is everyone being killed in the liquid phase. In phase 2, he will sit down on the ground, he will become a fiery dude, and then he will stand up. He still has concussive stomp, and then he does this thing called immolation, which is dealing 8,000 fire damage to every raid member every second, which is incredibly difficult to
good times.
Yeah. So healers, if you thought it wasn't a big pain in the butt before,
right.
Phase 2 will test you. And if he has these stacks of molten armor, he will basically wipe your group immediately. If he has more than a couple, because these basically increases damage that he does. So it's one of those things where you really need to blow all your cooldowns and get this guy down. And once you get there, it's not too bad, right, Colt?
Yeah, it's pretty quick. That would be phase 2, and that is this is your burn phase. This is when you pop Bloodlust. If you can, guys, try and stay away from Rhyolith when phase 2 begins. Just kind of get away from him, because that stomp and everything that he does still does do a significant amount of damage. So we try to stay away from him. And phase 2, actually, it's going to go quick. It's not like Beth Talak, where it's like 5 minutes of phase 2.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so it's a little bit easier on that as far as it's going to go fast. So this is the time to pop Bloodlust. Now, keep in mind, during phase 2, there will no longer be ads. However, there will still be those lines, that magma flow.
Mm-hmm.
So you still need to be aware of that because, once phase 2 hits, you're so happy. He's in his liquid phase. He's like liquid magma. And you're like, yes, we're finally here. And you start DPSing like crazy. And then you notice there's a huge line underneath your feet. And then boom.
Right.
So just make sure somebody is still calling out the line, still calling out magma flow,
Sure.
even in phase 2, because that can still wipe your raid.
And this is another reason to do that pirouetting thing right before phase 2. If you're concentrating on one foot and having all the DPS on that as much as you possibly can and still take care of ads, then that is going to be awesome because he won't be stepping on volcanoes, so maybe there won't be any, right? Hopefully.
Yeah.
There won't be any of these magma flows going out and killing people.
We've always had it, though. Every single attempt, we've always had
I'm
magma.
not saying it'll work out. I don't want to guarantee that stuff. No way.
Well, there's nothing about this fight that is guaranteed. I can say that.
Heck no. Aethric, how long do you think it took us in phase 2 to get him down?
Once he finally shifted into phase 2, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 seconds, if that.
Yeah, it was not very long
It went
at all.
real quick.
It's that quick, is it?
Yeah,
That's
it's
insane.
it's
Okay, I was
very
thinking
fast.
like maybe a minute.
No,
But
I don't think it's that. I think that it really is super super quick. Blow all your cooldowns and healers. Get out your big AOE heals because you're going to need them because there's a lot of damage going out, and especially in the phase change itself. If you have stacks of molten armor, you might need to blow a big heal there too. So
And try and stack up, too, if you can, just to help out your healers.
Yep, exactly. Is there anything that we missed as far as this fight goes that we haven't talked about yet?
As long as DPS, you've got you guys are DPSing that spark down along with the fragments. Usually, sometimes we even had like one guy would just be on the spark, and then the rest of the DPS was on the fragments, just to kind of help. So when the DPS is done with the fragments, they can then switch to the spark because at about that point, the spark should be at around 4 or 5 stacks. So that kind of helps in getting that guy down. I don't recommend waiting to DPS a spark until 4 or 5 stacks. Because that spark is going to get up there and just do so much damage to your tank that it's going to get just out of control.
Right. And there is so much RNG on this fight that it is incredibly tough. Oh, hey, one other thing that I just wanted to point out as kind of maybe this will save you a little bit of issues, some issues as you're trying to figure this fight out. I would suggest that you start out with having your ranged players, because they're the only ones that can actually choose where they want to stand. Have your ranged players, anybody that's doing the ad work, fall back to around the edge of the island, right? This is going to minimize your movement. This is going to help minimize some of that RNG stuff that goes out. It's not going to minimize. Well, it's not going to help you completely because these volcanoes are going to spawn kind of all over the place. But have a place. We have it like just across that little bridge area. We put a mark there for fragments, and then on either side, depending on where it spawns and everything like that, we have a mark for our tank to take the spark to. It just helps a little bit with some of that RNG. Makes it a little bit less crazy because you don't have stuff coming from behind you.
Right. And to speak to the RNG, what is RNG about this fight is actually the volcanoes that he activates.
Right.
That's what's so random, is that he'll be going in one direction and suddenly he'll light up a volcano on the other side of the room. And you're like, oh my gosh, and now you got to steer him all the way over there. And then while he's doing that, I've noticed, guys, he's lighting volcanoes now behind him. And I thought that Blizzard fixed that.
Yes.
But he's back to doing that now.
Yes. That is awful. Because that just means it's more time for those stacks to build up. It's awful.
Right. And that's what makes it so the randomness of it is that sometimes you'll get like 2 volcanoes. He'll light one, then light another right in front of him, and he'll just walk right over 2 of them, and you're like, great. And other times he'll light one, like I said, clear across the other side of the room. So it's such a random fight. You don't know what you're going to get. When we were first really struggling, there'd be fights where we get him to 8% health. And then there'd be fights. Then after that, we would just wipe constantly, like throughout the night. And then suddenly we get them to phase 2. So it's so random. It's I don't know that it's a little too random for me personally. We just started working on Bellrock, and there is a huge difference as far as RNG between Bellrock and Lord Rhyolith. Bellrock, you just like stand in one spot,
it's
and
easy.
The same thing happens every single time.
So much easier, so much more predictable.
Right.
It's completely predictable. So, and we'll talk about that fight on an upcoming podcast, I'm sure.